This podcast is a project of the Medina Focus, with the goal of providing space for collaboration and community among practitioners to the Muslim diaspora in North America. As people around the world have immigrated to the West, many Christians have realized that they live and work in the midst of the nations, and they often feel alone and unprepared to communicate cross-culturally. If you're looking for conversation and community surrounding issues of loving Muslim friends in Jesus' name, we welcome you into the conversation.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Brian.
And I'm Nate.
And you'll notice that Nate is joining me today. We have a special podcast episode for you. We are going to reflect back on our first year of the Medina Focus podcast. We've had a lot of interesting guests, a lot of really great conversations, and a lot of great follow-up calls. I hope you've been joining us on those follow-up calls. And so I invited Nate to come on, and we're just going to kind of kick back and forth some ideas and some conversation about things that we've seen and what we've experienced through this process. So, Nate, I'm really glad to finally have you on the program.
Yeah, I've been avoiding it as much as I could up till now because you get so many more interesting people than me, for sure.
You know, it's funny you say that because everyone has said that to me when I've invited them to come onto the show, which is one of the fascinating trends that I think are out there as we've had guests come on. Is most people's first response was, you know, why me? Who am I? I haven't done anything special. And so you actually fit in line with the trend there, Nate.
Well, that's good. I'm glad I could be normal.
for a change. We are too. So speaking of trends, Nate, as you've listened to the conversations that have happened in the podcast and then in the follow-up group calls, what are some of the trends that you've seen this year?
Well, it's actually connected to what you were just saying, because I thought the cool thing, the thing I saw that was common through all of the podcasts that we've done is that everybody's just so normal. I mean, they're down to earth. Nobody came across as being ultra professional and an authority figure. It seemed like everybody was humble and just kind of trying to figure out what they were doing on the ground for each location that people were working out of and the different settings that they were in. They were, just kind of feeling like they were the ones who were inexperienced and that everybody else had the experience. And so that was really refreshing that everybody just kind of felt like, as you're listening to the podcast, you're like, wow, that's a regular person. It's not a superstar. Mm-hmm. And it kind of gave a little bit of ability to feel like you could be part of the story because, hey, this is normal people that do this. But on the other hand, I think the opposite side of that, though, was also true. A big trend was how unique and special each individual was in how they were called, how they were doing this. So it's kind of a paradox a little bit, I guess, that everybody's so normal, but at the other end of it, everybody's uniquely qualified and called. And you could just see God's movement in how he's attracting people to this into a really extraordinary level. Like, most people don't do this, but the people who do, they all seem to be fairly similar, and they all seem to have this high quality level in common.
Yeah, Nate, I've seen the same thing where there is this real sense of humility and almost a reticence or a reluctance to be the voice on the basis of the fact that, I'm using air quotes here on a podcast, but I haven't done anything great or nothing great has happened yet. And I think some of this might be due to reading a lot of missionary biographies And you read the span of someone's entire life, and you see kind of their resume by the end of it. Here's the things that they accomplished. But if you were to meet them in the moment, they would just be some guy, bumbling around India or China or Thailand or wherever, and they would probably say, "Yeah, I'm nobody special. I haven't done anything yet." And I don't want to compare our guests to those people and put that weight on them. But I notice that this is a commonality, and I'll be honest, Nate, this is something that you've really changed in me and how I see things. And what I mean is this: when we would talk about planning something or doing a training, I feel like I've probably fit more of the traditional model, right? Someone who goes to Bible college and goes to seminary and gets credentialed, if you will. And because of that, you're forced into a very traditional mold where you assume, well, the person up front who's speaking should be the one with the right credentials. And I remember a lot of our early conversations where you and I would plan things together. You just wanted them to be flat and open, and everybody should share, and nobody's got this figured out. And early on, this was such a rock in my shoe, so to speak, where I thought, what on earth is he talking about? But then over time, I realized, like, no, it doesn't matter how much I think I have figured out. I really just don't. And obviously, that was part of God, taking me down some pegs. But I think that has really opened the door for a lot of practitioners. That attitude of flatness and openness has opened the door for a lot of practitioners to join in conversation and collaboration and to engage in all of this.
Yeah, it's there are people who have doctorates in this kind of in that kind of training, and then there are people who just feel a call from God to care about their neighbor, and they go out and start. And practically speaking, when we actually engage, we start to engage, we're on the same level, no matter how much education we have at that point, because we're still trying to figure out how people are going to respond, right?
Yeah, when I started down in Houston, I recognized that I had been to Bible college and a few years of seminary and didn't have a lot of practical field experience. And I kind of bumbled through pastors' offices and mission offices and all kinds of things down here looking for someone with 10, 15 years experience to mentor me and, that I could just work under and help them out. And after a while, this strange thing happened where people started looking to me as a leader. And I think a lot of our guests have said something like this. In fact, I remember in particular Marie she did the episode Year One in Alaska. She's talking about all the struggles that she was facing, kind of getting, on the one side, struggling for recognition and acceptance. On the other hand, not feeling like she was the one who is the leader. And what I told her was, well, if you're the one asking the questions, inevitably over time, people will look to you as, well, you're obviously the leader because you're asking the questions.
Yeah, I think the way I describe this oftentimes is if you find yourself being out of the people that are gathered or the people in the room, you find yourself as being the least unqualified person. And being the least unqualified person means that you get to do it, right?
Yeah, I think on this trend in particular, the fact that everyone feels this sense of, well, I don't have it figured out and I don't know, I think once you kind of develop that as the curve and that as the trend across all of these very diverse contexts, I mean, in terms of cities, the people group that people are working with, the socioeconomics, the branch of Islam, the generation of immigration, first gen, second gen, third, etc. The fact that this topic keeps coming back up should encourage people to go, you know what, because this is new and hasn't been figured out, there's room for somebody who's just normal like me to get in there and put my hand to the plow.
That's interesting that you kind of commented about all those different variables. I don't know if this is the right time to bring it up, but Candace and I, one of our other guests, we're thinking about a project where we might kind of help practitioners that are just getting started by kind of showing the spectrums of all those different variables that can be played out, because people invariably kind of ask this question, well, how do I engage my Muslim friend? And they think in some way that it's going to be kind of monolithic, like it's going to be all one. You can answer that question easily. Just tell me, I'll answer what their name is and what country they're from, and then you'll be able to answer the question. But all of those different variables make what we do extremely complex, because with all those working variables, you can't give pat answers, and you have to have more nuanced understandings of how this particular Muslim friend of mine is going to fit into the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's such a diversity, even if you're dealing with one language group or one national origin, and that's whether you're in country or in the diaspora. And I think that's one of the things that diaspora workers have to unlearn about a lot of global missiology, is that it's just so diverse here. It's very difficult to chart and track. I think one of the new trends that was surprising to me uh, is the trend of trauma care. A number of our guests are utilizing trauma care in some way or another. And in retrospect, it actually makes a lot of sense if you think of, well, why are internationals here? There's a huge subsection of them who their genesis story of coming to the States or coming to the West involves mass chaos, trauma, warfare, all manner of very dangerous and dark things.
Yeah, and both Steve and Samantha, um, we had both those two guests talking about trauma care, and I remembered both of them uh, bringing up the point that, hey, before we can really listen to and deal with other people's trauma, we have to kind of come to grips that we're facing our own too. And that was really an insight that kind of was surprising to me, and that was a trend that people were discovering along the way. And I guess it kind of makes sense, because, and as you're engaging, you also have to come to grips with avoiding secondary trauma. I mean, you can be the person who's coaching someone through their trauma, and if you're doing this over and over again with multiple people, you're going to start to take on some of their trauma and be traumatized by it. So that it's in this case, there's even as you're ministering, you have to try to learn how to be ministered to in the midst of it, because this trauma has to be dealt with by both parties.
What are the things that are surprising or interesting that you've learned from the stories that you've heard?
I think the most surprising and interesting story was with Candace learning about muppies. And, we all kind of just have a clear idea of what diaspora are. They're basically international students and refugees. But she brought up a whole new concept of this professional class immigrant, and how could we be more intentional about engaging with them in the workplace. And I know that you've thought about this a lot, and you've even engaged in some of this training. And I really believe that there's something there that we need to dig into more that hasn't really been captured.
I think you're right. The common view that I say the average person has, I'm generalizing here, but the common view is that internationals are refugees. And for a large number of them, they certainly are. But there's so many in my city, and I know in many of other major cities, where they're highly, highly professional, highly trained, very wealthy, speak English. They don't have any of those kind of needs that refugees have, and yet they still need Jesus. It almost makes them harder to reach. I think one of the most surprising or exciting stories for me was the story that Trevor shared about how the Aham people in San Diego are helping with translation, and just the number of layers of technology and collaboration that are being used. And it just makes so much sense. One of the things that I love to highlight, and I love to hear stories, and there were so many stories this year that were shared on this topic, are, what's the global impact that diaspora ministry has? I know for many people, their story of becoming a diaspora missionary often is filled with disappointment, right? So maybe they're headed to the field and can't go, and they interpreted their call to mission as to a specific place, and now they're dealing with or reeling from the realization that that's not going to happen in the way that they thought. Or they're a returning missionary who for health reasons or for reasons of political trauma or getting kicked out of the country or whatever, they are returned to the West. And with both of them, they're dealing with, what has God done with me? Why does he have me on a shelf? And I think when you hear Trevor's story and some of the others about kind of the global impact side of this, that's where it gets exciting to think, okay, God has put me in Houston, and he's put Trevor in San Diego, and he's put you, out there by Seattle, and all of these people, just as specifically as he's placed refugees, he's placed us. And to see the global impact that we can have is just astounding to me.
Yeah, I think out of all of the episodes, I think I heard the excitement of the interview more out of you during that episode too. You were really animated during that one, and it was exciting to hear that excitement in you guys. And I agree. I think where do we? It's so easy to think of ourselves as doing the second best thing. We can't go overseas, or something keeps us from doing the bigger important thing, and so we minimize the importance of what we're doing, and we imagine that it's only going to impact the one or two people that we're engaging with. But we forget that people are so connected globally that everything that we do, even in our own neighborhood, translates into global impact for the gospel when people are connecting over WhatsApp with their family back in their home country, and they've got their own social networks that are far-reaching. And if we impact, one or two people, that conversation can be extended in amazing ways.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's even something that Candace brought up in her podcast on Muppies. She had a number of stories that were about her connecting, to her future people group where she's headed now, based on people she had met in the Bay Area, and I think also in the Austin area. And then I know that she had a stop in Chicago on her way out and met some more people there. And I've only caught a few brief snippets of update, but I was very excited to hear that some of these relationships had indeed proved fruitful and had led to more relationships. And so I think whether people are returning or are headed out, diaspora ministry is such an important component of not just training and mobilizing, but even getting people connected before they ever leave. So one of the Nate networking distinctives that I've learned from you is two-way communication is always preferable to one-way. And so what I mean is a lot of networking events, missions conferences, etc., a lot of them are kind of a fishing pond where the organization itself picks up a bunch of email addresses and then starts emailing everyone. And then at some point wonders, why is no collaboration happening? Or it's a conference where it's just information sharing and it's very top down. It's more like the tradition I was saying, where you find the expert, you put them on the stage, and everyone listens and takes notes. And you were very sensitive against these things, and I've seen where you always, whenever there's a one-way communication, you're always looking for, but how do we get that going both directions? And so a podcast is like an email, but just audio. It's a one-way conversation, even between two people. It's one way. And so the way that you have helped broaden this out of being a one-directional communication is you had the idea of doing a follow-up call where you can meet the guest and interact with the guest. So tell us a little bit about these follow-up calls. What have they been like?
Yeah, I think that there's a big difference between broadcast communication and interactive communication. Both of them are good. We need to get information relayed to us. We need to be able to get equipped by learning new things, learning new tools. And oftentimes that happens when we listen to, or we watch, we go to a training, we receive training like that. But so much more is learned experientially, especially with adult learning styles. And as if we're getting on the job training, we're learning as we're talking, we're interacting. That's so much better. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think the getting to have a follow up discussion. We can, in the podcast itself, we can ask certain questions, and you've got a great list of questions that we've kind of standardized for the podcast for the first year. And those questions and how they get discussed elicit other internal questions that we don't get answered as we're listening to the podcast. So to be able to offer a secondary opportunity to have those questions answered and go deeper with the guest has been really fruitful, and we've had some really great discussions.
I've found it interesting that we have a number of people that show up to the follow-up call who may not even be aware of the podcast. So it's kind of taken on a life of its own.
Yeah, it's so actually people are the people that are listening to the podcast might not even know that we have those secondary conversations, because honestly, this is the podcast has got a specific audience that we're shooting for, but it's out there in the public, and anybody can find it and listen to it, and not have any kind of knowledge that there's this other conversation happening, because we have generally promoted that through an email. So if you think of, all of these broadcast communication tools, we have email, we've got a podcast, but we use both of those tools to draw people into a greater conversation that's interactive. So if you want to be invited into those side conversations, then all you have to do is make a request at info@medinafocus.com, and we'd be happy to add you to the list that you'd receive the notifications of when they are going to happen. Yeah, so thanks, Brian, you had some really good questions to ask me, and now let me ask you a few questions too. So, and part of it has to do with that last comment that I made about the great lineup of interview questions that you did a really artful job of making them sound different for each podcast, but really you were asking kind of the same flow of questions of each guest.
Yes.
And like I said, you made it sound like it was a unique set of questions because of the way you worded them differently. But how did you come up with the questions that you posed to the podcast guests?
Yeah, my undergrad is in philosophy, and so as an amateur philosopher, I have an endless way of asking the same questions without saying anything qualitatively new. So that might explain that skill a little bit. The questions are they're born out of other conversations that we've had with people, and so you and I have been partnered together, networking people for some time now. And this goes back to what I was saying about, the two different ways of organizing a meeting being, have an expert present and people listen, or have a collaborative conversation. And, you've been really helpful in designing these collaborative experiences. And so what these look like for people who haven't been to one is we meet in a room. This year we've done this online. It's been really interesting. But typically we meet in a room together, and we are able to very quickly allow people to bring in whatever topic that they want to talk about. And so it's very contemporary. Instead of going to a conference and just absorbing what they want you to absorb, but maybe not having your question answered. You can walk in the door, have a question about team building or fundraising or conflict management or contextualization or anything, and then very quickly we sort through these topics, we establish them into groups, and come up with a schedule on the fly. Well, we've been doing this for years now, and so these questions are kind of born out of a number of commonalities that we've heard through those conversations. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I go back to Marie and her year one in Alaska conversation. She was at one of these meetings and was bringing up much of what she shared on the podcast, uh, but was able to get the practical help she needed because she was asking three other people at the table who had all been through year one.
Yeah.
And instead of going, "This is year one, it's terrible, I quit," she was able to talk with three other people who go, "You know what? This is year one." And so I think through this experience, we've been able to just figure out, okay, there are some commonalities behind how people are thinking about themselves. Questions like how do you sort out your identity? Um, these are just very common factors. How do you maintain a healthy work-life balance? I mean, I know so many workers, and I'm certainly one of them. I remember Steve on his one on trauma care was talking about how many people will brag, "Hey, I'm the hardest working person in the city," and I've been guilty of that before. And
Mm-hmm.
so, a lot of these questions are just very practical. People are balancing between the worlds of church and family and mission. At the same time, they're balancing multiple jobs and streams of income, and probably still not making ends meet. So yeah, these questions just came out of those experiences.
I guess I was a little shocked, and maybe I shouldn't have been, but it was interesting to me. I didn't expect that there were going to be so much commonality. There was going to be so much commonality, as we
Mm-hmm.
started having those meetings, and we gave the participants the opportunity to set the agenda and to put their own topics of importance out there. They wound up being the same, fairly similar every time, and
Yeah,
and that was kind of amazing. That okay, yeah, there's this common, almost like a tribal um, flow of obstacles.
I think that's right. And I think if you walk in the door going, "Man, I don't know how to connect with the church and get churches to participate in what I'm doing," man, that's my problem because I just went to a conference and what I'm supposed to be thinking about is how do I do T for T or how do I do DMM or how do I do this or that. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but that's just not often what we're struggling with. But then when you sit at a table and go, "Hey, here's five other people, five other contexts, five other ministries, and we're all struggling with how do we bridge this gap between we're here on the front line, on the street, working with this people group, and we don't know how to get that message back into the pew and pulpit, and there's this disconnect." Uh, you go from walking through the door with a problem to walking out the door with some comrades, with some friends, and some support of going, okay, no one's figured this out. I'm not behind the curve. I'm not doing a bad job. It's just a hard thing. And since this information is so contemporary, there's nowhere where you can find this in a book, and up until now, even in a podcast.
Yeah, there's something about that where you go from this I'm alone feeling to hey, there are people out there that are dealing with the same issues that I am, and it makes you want to collaborate and to work together. You see, well,
Right.
first of all, you get encouraged that you're not alone because we all do feel isolated. We all feel like we're the only ones that have been called to do this. But then you get this idea of what would it look like to work with other people. And so I mean that's what our goal is here in networking people, is to see that happen. So let me ask you, Brian, um, can you paint me a picture of what how the world would look different if we were successful at networking the way that we want to, with getting Muslim ministry practitioners together? What would the how would the world look differently?
Yeah, I think Um, in the ministry world, things are very siloed off, and there are reasons for these, a number of reasons. Some are theological, some are historical, some are political, some are denominational. And I know that you've spent time as a worker overseas. I have as well, and I think our experience on the field side is that when we're on the street, there's something that unites me with everybody else from every other organization, in spite of how divided they are, at the headquarters. There's something that unites me with them because it's us, and we're surrounded by millions and millions of whatever people group. And so I think we have these moments where we experience this. I'll call it trans tribal harmony, where uh, you might wear one flagship banner and I wear another, but when we are set to this project, we're working together in our banner and who gets credit and all of that. This kind of just fades to the background, and I think part of the problem that we see with when this doesn't happen is you don't have information that's being shared. You have people with ideas that are fantastic ideas that no one gets to hear, no one gets to benefit from. And so, if we could break down the walls, or maybe that's not the right way to say it, maybe if we could open up lines of communication between organizations, between churches and agencies, between street practitioners and institutions, um, all of a sudden, the people who need the resourcing are able to get it. I mean, you and I have seen this happen again and again, where someone joins the Slack community, or someone gets connected to the broader Medina focus community, and almost immediately they're able to get what they need. Where they say, "Hey, my coworker friend has moved from this city to that city and needs a team to join. Who knows somebody there?" And magically, someone pops up and goes, "Hey, we just had somebody move there too." Or the reverse thing happens. My Muslim friend is headed to this city and I don't know who I can connect him with. And so we've seen some of this collaboration where it's not just ideas that are being shared or information, but it's relationships that are being shared and people are being connected. And really the question is, why not? I mean,
Yeah.
we see this on social media. I look up a hashtag for something I'm interested in, and I realize, hey, here's 5 other people that are interested in this. And I click follow on Instagram, or I click, friend on Facebook. And then before long, we start talking. And I may have never met them, but somehow we build trust and we build community. And from that comes collaboration.
And there's something more to it, I think, though. I remember going to meetings and asking a room full of people, how can we serve you? How can we network? What tool could we provide? And the answer that kept coming was, we need to have an online database of all the other people that
Mm-hmm.
are working with Muslims. We need to have an online database that shows all the different resources that we have available to us. And and everybody would nod, and that seemed like that's what everybody wanted. But we knew that other people had been doing that, and we'd seen those tools get unused. They just weren't used, and they were so hard to keep updated, very expensive to put them out there.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, what I kind of just observed was, what we really need is a relational database.
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean by that is that instead of having a list of names that you don't know, that you could look up, let's say I wanted to find out who's in Phoenix and who's working there, what organizations there are there. Um, if there was the ability to have this amazing magical database out there, then I could just look it up and be impersonal about it and just find out who I wanted to follow up contact with. But how much more valuable when you actually know someone, you have a relationship with someone in Phoenix, and you can go and connect with them on a relational basis, and they can introduce you personally to firsthand friends that they have, that they know. And it's kind of like the degrees of separation with Kevin Bacon. We want to somehow reduce the degrees of distance between practitioners from, let's say it's 4 now. What if we could make that 2? If we could reduce that degree of separation from 4 to 2 between any two
Mm-hmm.
Muslim ministry practitioner, that would be awesome.
Yeah. You know, the whole relationship and trust thing, I think that's so important to understand. Um, we often think, hey, if we just create the system, it will naturally fill and naturally populate itself. And they don't understand that even where you see a healthy, vibrant online community, it's not simply because the platform was available. There has to be a personal component, a people component that make that network run, that give it life. And I think in this world, that is trust and relationships. And I think back to one of our early meetings where we were at a conference, and the time to go listen to the big speaker was at hand. And the hotel had these super cool, kind of like a Majlis, these little cubby hole, low to the ground sofas that were wrapped around, and everybody's really close and facing each other. And at a certain point, I was kind of exhausted and just sitting there, catfishing, if you will, for anybody that would sit down with me and talk. Um, and I remember you sat down and a couple other people sat down, and we spent just a couple of hours. And it wasn't necessarily hammering out the latest, greatest issues that were, pressing. It was just learning about each other as people, hearing about each other's work. And from that meeting, I know for you and I personally, came so many elements where, trust was built, relationship was established, communication was opened up. And then, I mean, you and I have been working for years now together, even though we're at opposite ends of the country. We've taken family vacations together and done other meetings together. And so, we've personally experienced how does the right one meeting and the right opening line and topic of conversation, how does that build into a very fruitful ministry collaboration?
Yeah, and that kind of turns around to the different question that I would ask is, why in the world don't people collaborate? What's the holdup? Why don't people get to this?
I mean, if we could lay some biblical language over this, I think we could look at Corinthians where Paul is talking about body language, and someone's the hand and someone's the foot and the eye and the brain and everything else. And then you say, well, take it at the church level. Why do churches disintegrate? Why is there disunity? Or organizations, same thing. I mean, ultimately, I would say in that context, if I can case the debate this way, it's sin. And some of those, I would say, are things like pride, things like I have to be right. I'm insecure and I need to be recognized for my achievements. And if I share it with you, what if I don't get recognized for those? I think Steve was talking about this in Nashville. The spirit of competition that he was witnessing and observing. And I've seen that in my own city. Honestly, confession time, I've been guilty of it before. And I look back on the last basically since you've known me and then since before you've known me. I had to go through a transition where I stopped fighting over control, fighting to be up front, fighting for all of that. And that really, from a personal standpoint, helped open up the ability to just to deal with insecurity. Once the insecurity is dealt with, now you're in a place of security where I don't view your question as a threat. I don't view your invitation as some kind of ploy or some kind of trick or some kind of way where I have to figure out how do I leverage and how do I kind of get to the front and make sure that my interests are known and respected. And obviously, I think this is born out of histories where organizations have rolled over people or churches have rolled over people and have taken advantage. But I think we just have to open up the lines of communication, trust, relationship. And I think there's, again, going back to what all of our trauma care specialists have told us, there's a need for personal inner healing before we go and help others. And I think those are some of the things I see as to why people don't collaborate. Is a lot of it's very personal issues or personal flaws, if you will, that they haven't fully recognized or dealt with.
Yeah, and it's even with the word collaboration, subliminally, it's got some ambiguity to it. you know, it's potentially a really negative term. If you think in terms of like during wartime, you know, people get shot for collaborating. If you're a collaborator, you're gonna get, you know, the firing squad, right?
That's true.
And so it hasn't always had a positive aspect to it. Like we right now, it's kind of a faddish. You know, it's the trend for people to talk about collaborating. And what I think I've noticed though is that it's interesting that, you know, people talk about collaborating a lot, but actually getting to collaborate to
Hmm.
actually working together, I think people get this sense that they have to have a memo of understanding, and they have to write up, you know, 8 papers, you know, 8 papers filled with rules and understandings and perceptions that each party is going to sign before we can
Right.
do anything together. And I don't. I think it also is connected to how it's easy to respond to things. It's easy to, um, you know, the great story I've read recently in a book was where these two guys are on the bank of a river, and they hear a child crying from the river, drowning in the river, and so they go out to save the child, and they pull the child up to the shore, and then they hear another child crying from the river, and another, and they start pulling these children out of the river that are drowning, and before long, one of the guys comes out of the water and starts to walk upstream, and the other one asks him, "Well, where are you going? We need to get these kids out of the water." He says, "No, I'm going to go up and find out upriver who's throwing these kids in."
Right.
And so that's kind of, I know that's kind of a little different than what we think of as collaboration, but so much of what we do individually is reactionary,
Hmm.
and it doesn't go to the source. It doesn't. If we work together, we may reflect more and get to the source of what's causing the things that give us obstacles.
Right. Right.
And so there's, I think it just takes a level of putting down the urgent thing that we're responding to right now that we can do on our own, and adopting the imagination of what it could be like if we solve the bigger picture that none of us can do individually. What can we only do together that we
Hmm.
cannot, that we can't actually do individually?
Yeah, I think it's easy for people to be wrapped up very much in the here and now of their own emergencies than to be able to think about what could we do together. And this is true on an individual basis, a church level, denominational, institutional. I think we saw this come to the forefront when Dave was sharing about mobilizing in his episode on mobilizing Latin America for Central Asia. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I was of course super impressed to be chatting with Dave and very interested in what he was doing. And I think his experience is what many young Latin Americans experience, uh, which is maybe not being as connected to existing or historic uh, opportunities, and kind of just being of a generation of, hey, well, let's go get it, let's make it happen. And so I've talked with a lot of young Latinos who are missions minded but don't know other missions minded Latinos. At the same time, I know that you and I know Comey Bomb and a lot of the leaders of Comey Bomb, and you know, I know Vision 5.
Comina?
Yeah, Vision 59 also has a whole Latin American division, and there are really great things happening in Latin America that are institutional, that are historic, and so you know, I'm equally excited about what they're doing. And then I look at both of these sides, right? The people who are young and energetic and enthusiastic, and the people who have been around a long time and have actually, you know, built networks and built organizations. And I see the same thing happening in our country as well. You know, people come into my city. I say my city like I own it, which I do say it like I own it. So, but you know, people come into Houston and uh, you know, they don't see something happening. It's like, oh, let's start it, and it's kind of it's a very awkward dance of me being on the other side of that
Mm-hmm.
equation now, of being, well, actually, there is a network here. You know, we'd love to talk with you about coming and joining us. And then you sit at the table, and it's like, well, who's sitting at the head of this table, and why is there a head? And it can get very, very awkward, and there's a lot of opportunity for disunity. Um, Instead of, I mean, it's I'd say it's just my own experiences that it's difficult to overcome having been on both sides, feeling like an outsider to many networks here in the States myself. Even now that
Yeah.
I teach at a school and I have a doctorate and I'm writing stuff, I still feel like many networks and organizations, I'm standing at the front door holding my hat and knocking, staring through the window, and not knowing how to break in. On the other hand, in Houston itself, I represent one of the older members of the network of people who reach Muslims here, and can be a little bit sensitive to young people who come in and like, oh, there's nothing happening. I'm like, well, calm down. And I'm not saying that's what Dave was saying. I just think, we can see these issues be replicated throughout cultures globally. And I think what we are trying to do through Medina Focus, through the podcast, through the various networking events, is flatten down some of those lines of distinction so that people can go, hey, we actually really agree on this topic, and we're really
Hmm.
excited by, we share a similar vision, a similar ministry philosophy. We should do something. How do we do something? That's what we want to
Yeah.
see.
And it's different than I've had a lot of people that they I invite them to something and they go, I just don't have time just to network, just to go and meet people and talk to people. Um, and they somehow they don't catch the added value.
Mm-hmm.
There's like they imagine that the only thing that we're doing is gathering people and having social interaction or something, and that there's some people that just don't have the imagination to visualize what could be beyond just merely connecting with people. And I think that if I had a wish and I could unlock the part of people that overlooks the visionary ability to see other people and how we might work together to build the kingdom together, that would be the prayer I would like to have answered, that God, would you unlock that ability in everybody so that they can visualize the bigger
Right,
picture
right.
and what we could do.
Yeah, I think Ryan mentions this a little bit in his overcoming obstacles in Amarillo episode, and I really enjoyed chatting with him. Such great wisdom and insight. Again, it's a very similar set of struggles of how do we connect what we're doing to the local church. At the same time, the local church doesn't always understand what we're doing and isn't always willing to grow because, I mean, if you just wake up, especially having been to Amarillo, you just wake up in a small town anywhere in the United States, this is home and they're not from here, they should do things our way. That's just the basic kind of default view. And obviously the heart of a missionary is, well, I have to pour myself out. I have to make the steps across the aisle. I have to make the changes. I have to be the flexible one in order for them to hear. And it's difficult but to be between those two rocks where there's a desire for collaboration. At the same time, collaboration brings liability. What if you say something that I don't agree with? How are we going to sort that out? Who's going to,
Yeah.
you know, this is the liability side of collaboration. I think that's maybe one reason why some people are afraid to take that step is we don't have the skills, or maybe it's not even a skills problem. Maybe it's we don't have the relationship and the trust apart from MOUs, memorandums of understanding, that are detailed and signed as to how all of this works. Um, One of the really great things that I've enjoyed, I realize since I'm the one asking the questions all the time, people might perceive me to be the leader, and I'm really just along for the ride. And I love to learn, and I love to listen and ask questions. And so, even in the follow-up calls, I mean, I'm learning so much from the various participants. And it was Samantha who later came on the show. She shared an article on, I forget the name, but it's on mentoring cross-culturally, and basically Eastern views versus Western views on how to mentor and disciple, and certain elements that we put in place if I'm going to disciple you, we're going to have an agreed upon schedule, and we're going to have an agreed upon goal, and we're going to keep it very professional and business-like, kind of at arm's distance, and we're going to write all of this down, and we're both going to have this learning covenant together. In the East, that's viewed as, well, why wouldn't you be relational with me? Whereas in the West, that's maybe viewed as inappropriate or something. Why wouldn't you be like a parent to me? The fact that you're making me sign something shows that you don't trust me. We don't have this trust. And I think, honestly, as we work cross-culturally, we need to learn those lessons of relationship building. I know I learned a lot of this living in the Middle East, of how they network based on who they know, because that is the basis and the foundation for sorting out these disagreements.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you're bringing up something that maybe is a new idea to most people on that are listening, because probably most people don't work with cross culturally in their cities. They're probably working with their um, you know homogenous church unit,
Mm-hmm.
and may not have partners that are working cross culturally. So that's not the case in your city for sure. What does it look like to collaborate with cross culturally with people of different nationalities or different ethnicities in your setting?
That is a very challenging task, and as diverse as people who look and sound like me are, and how different their stories are and their living and working environments, that just gets exponentially more diverse as we add to that mix, Spanish background, Mandarin background, Korean background. Um, and so I think a lot of it requires relationship. And it's easy for a lot of the people they're working cross culturally, but their team is pretty homogeneous. It's easy for them to still operate as Westerners, and they draw people who identify with that cultural or that team paradigm, we'll say. It's a lot more difficult for them to make the transition and to invite people from other ethnicities onto their teams, because it's very Western. It's time driven, goal driven, numbers driven. And I'm not saying that's bad or that's wrong. I'm just saying it's Western. And so there are a lot of internationals. That said, there are a
Yeah.
lot of internationals who have been educated in the West, who are themselves somewhat Westernized in terms of how they want to meet and how they want to operate. And so they are used to the Western kind of business model as the paradigm of choice, and they are drawn to that. At the same time, there's a whole different segment of workers here who are not time driven, who are relational, who are just much more international, not in terms of who they're reaching, though that's international as well, but also in terms of how are they reaching them. And so their team meetings might be at 9 o'clock at night, um, and might be open ended, and might just be lots of conversational and relationship building rather than agenda driven meeting. And their outreach might look very, very different from our usual more programmatic numbers, trackable styles that are more common in Western circles. And so it is fantastic being in a context where a lot of that does happen. At the same time, it presents a lot of challenges, and on both sides. We always look at, well, what's the challenge to me? And the assumption is, well, I'm the default stakeholder because this is home for me. But the reality is, in Houston, people from other places have been here long enough. This is home for them too, and they're just different from me, or different from my way of doing things, and they're equal stakeholders, really. And so, learning how to work through that, just it's like going cross cultural your first time. It's the same lessons.
That all reminds me of the episode with Jennifer talking about third culture identity, and how second generation Muslims in our cities, how we engage with them. It's all a negotiation, because we're trying to I actually had a Libyan friend over the other day, and we were talking about how we have this they've got a style of dancing, and we've got a style of dancing. It's a cultural dance, and we have to learn each other's steps. And at some point along the way, we're doing a combined dance move, right? And they're having to do some of our dance, and we're having to do some of their dance, and it gets a little tricky to do the negotiating of which parts we're going to trade off, and which parts we're going to kind of offer each other to, which part will I give up, which part will I adopt, and making sure those match up well. So yeah, that's fascinating. I think that's the new world, the new complex world that we live in ministry. So with that in mind, what are some of the topics that we haven't covered yet that you want to cover, that you feel like are, next in line, or things that we need to dive into in 2021?
Yeah, I think this is a great question for us to kind of close out on as we're thinking about 2021 and sort of the topics yet to be done. I think it's some of the themes and the commonalities that have come out of these conversations even. I mean, we've heard a number of people talk about their first year in ministry. We've heard a number of people talk about their first year back from the field and the challenges that they faced. We've had a number of people share ideas about here's how what we're doing locally impacts globally. We've had a number of people share about trauma care, trauma healing. And so with all of these different ideas that I just mentioned, these are in fact going to be topics that are upcoming. But more than that, we're also changing the format a little bit. So to date, it's just been me talking with one other person, and we're going to try to do group collaborative calls. We've probably all had the kind of meeting with people where, I talk to you and then I talk to so-and-so and they go, well, what did Nate say about this? And I'm trying to get their consensus. And so I explain to them what Nate said, but I explain it through the lens of Brian. And then I go and talk to the third person. They say, well, what did the two other people say? And so with each one, it's your words, but with my inflection. And then we say, okay, let's all agree to do this. But if I let you and person number 2, 3, and 4 actually talk together, you might ask a question or might make a comment based on what they said that I would never think of through my own lens and through my own experience. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to in the upcoming group discussions is, I realize that opens it up and might make it a little bit more wild for some people, but I think that'll be really great to hear some of the crosstalk that will happen as someone else's complete different perspective from my own might get really excited and ask or say something that I would never think to ask or say.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think we've got a good starting list, but of things to bring up, and panel discussion guests to invite based on those ideas. But I'm also really interested in maybe polling our listeners for some unusual topics that we've never even thought of before, So definitely info@medinafocus.com. If you have ideas to suggest to us that you'd like to have as a topic, we'd be really excited to get some new ideas as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. We love ideas. We love them to trickle up from everybody. And, Nate and I devise as many methods for letting people speak and giving them a platform. I know a lot of times people hear, oh, there's this thing happening and I can't go knock on that door because they don't know me. I can speak for both Nate and I. We have a very open front door of wanting to hear and listen and get to know you. So if you've been listening to the podcast, we would love to hear your thoughts. And if you have ideas about topics you'd like to hear, maybe you'd like to appear on the show, we'd love to chat with you about that. So that's a wrap for 2020. Nate, this has been, as always, a fun conversation, talking and reflecting with you over a productive year of conversations and collaborative meetings.
It's always a blast. I'm looking forward to the next time we have the opportunity to get face to face again for some of our gatherings. It'll be a lot nicer.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all for listening and supporting our program and joining our collaborative discussions. You've really been a big encouragement to us as we have pushed forward in doing a podcast and the collaborative calls. And so we hope you'll continue this through the coming year.
You've been listening to the Medina Podcast. This show is hosted by Brian Hebert and produced by Nate Schultz. The conversations we have on this program are born out of an expanding environment of collaboration among grassroots ministry practitioners across the North American continent. Click subscribe in your favorite podcast app and take a moment to help us get the word out to others by sharing this program freely. If you would like to engage on a deeper level, please email us at medinafocus@vision59.com.